civic education can be a lot of different things, but civic education, as we discuss it in our book, is the ensuring that citizens have the skills that they need to both understand and engage the wheels of democracy as needed within their lives.
Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech Podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast, or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech Podcast button at the top of the page. Today's episode is sponsored by my new free quiz, Unlock the Best Way to Use Chatbots in Your Teaching. This quick 5-question quiz will help you figure out the best way to use AI this school year. Find out if AI can support your instructional planning and help you tackle your to-do list. Everyone who takes the quiz will also get a free ebook. Head to classtechtips.com/quiz to find my new quiz. Unlock the best way to use chatbots in your teaching. That's classtechtips.com/quiz. This week's episode is titled Civic Education Beyond the Textbook with Shawn McCusker. I've known Shawn for about a decade and heard him speak about EdTech topics like civic education. I asked him to join today to chat about his book, the book that he co-authored titled Becoming Active Citizens: Practices to Engage Students in Civic Education Across the Curriculum. Today on the podcast, Shawn shares lots of tips, strategies, and a few EdTech tools that I know you'll want to check out or maybe recommend to a colleague. Let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Shawn. I am so excited to chat with you today about civic education and going beyond a textbook. But before we jump into all of that, can you share a bit about your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
So I began in schools as a teacher and a school administrator for 25 years, and then had an opportunity to do some work in large urban cities where people were underfunded. So I got into that working through my current employer, EdTech Teacher, and then I went and did the same work with Digital Promise. So I've got a background in working with schools that are trying to get started with technology. I do a lot of training for schools that are either trying to move forward and become innovative, or schools that have started that process but hit a bump in the road. I like to call it like program recovery. Like that didn't work, right? So I really love my day-to-day is working with schools to establish like what is it that they need, how can we achieve that, and then to create like activities for teachers to do to experience that and learn from it, right? Mm-hmm. So I travel around the country. I go to schools and work with different groups of teachers. I will sometimes consult with leadership about what are the ways, what should we be considering in terms of our planning? Like when something like AI blows up, and I know that there's like just work across everywhere for AI, but when AI blew up, people were sitting flat-footed, not prepared for it to become so in their face. And I feel like there's schools that are still now just deciding like, I guess we can't avoid this. Yeah. So helping them get a sense of calm and composure and direction as they jump into building programs for their teachers that will And I think AI is different in that sense. We can get to this, but AI isn't something that everyone was like, oh my gosh, we need that.
Right.
AI is something that's everyone was like, it's everywhere. It's literally everywhere. And we don't have the infrastructure to support it. So a better way of saying it is that my preference is not just to teach people about something, but to build systems to allow them to process the benefits, the challenges, and issues that are going to arise when they jump into those new areas of education. So that's kind of what I do, and spend a lot of time talking to schools and learning what they really need, and working with some partners as well. But I like that we're in a position where we can choose the partners we have, right? Like it's people that are valid, people that are meaningful, people that are doing great work. I love working for Formative and Newsella, right? Because those were things I used as a teacher that meant something to me. It showed me what people were doing. It gave me data so that I wasn't like grasping in the dark. So when I can work with someone who is doing that, it's really satisfying work if you believe in education,
And just that idea, even of the program recovery that you mentioned, I like that term so much because I think it really validates someone who might be having an experience of we tried and this is not where we want to be. It doesn't mean that we necessarily have to abandon everything that we did, but we're in this stage where we can, take a step back and maybe get some help and support. And, I'm sure that comes up, right, with those AI conversations and other spaces too. And, today we're talking about civic education, right? And that might be another area where people are rethinking, like, what do we really want to accomplish? What do we want to do here? And so before we get into some of those pieces, can you share with us what that term civic education means? Like what falls under that category?
So civic education can be a lot of different things, but civic education, as we discuss it in our book, is the ensuring that citizens have the skills that they need to both understand and engage the wheels of democracy as needed within their lives, right? So I think that there's been a redefinition of civic education that is essential. When I was in school, they taught us to vote. You only had a couple of weeks of government in your U.S. history class. You learned 1 week on each of the branches. You learned the rules and keywords, checks and balances, and things, and words like that we don't use anymore, like living constitution. That's all of a sudden very charged. But my thoughts on civic education are that voting is one day that's generally once a year, and that's what we had focused on. And now with social media, you can engage the government, you can engage people through a variety of means, like by informing them of the challenges that we face, by creating a message, by collecting money that you can use to then support candidates, or you can talk at government meetings. Like a 9-year-old could go to the library and speak at a library board meeting, and they're participating in government. And so to me, civics education in its old sense is voting once every year, and civic education in its new sense is like being a participant in all the ways that you can. And waiting until you're 18 is not the way. So the work that I do with civics education is to create programs and systems within schools so that not just social studies teachers, but every teacher across the curriculum understands that definition and can share and help students to grasp what's happening. I think it's politically charged right now to talk about the role of government. But in my belief, the role of government is to take care of and solve problems for us and to address issues that affect people's lives. And we can start doing that way before we just cast one vote. I think the point I was trying to make if we believe that government is doing nothing but harming us, we don't value it, right? But if we have government and we understand what it's doing, for instance, like if you're a home economics teacher and you're creating clothes and doing design or if you're teaching like cooking, there's all kinds of government interactions in that. There's like standards for eggs and rules for food. There's the fact that if you make clothing for children, there's rules about what kind of fabrics you can use so that it's not flammable. And all of those little things are things that the government does to ensure safety at certain levels. And we kind of ignore that for how much am I paying in taxes,
Yeah.
and other bigger, more prevalent things. And getting people to see the value we gain. Like, for instance, I kind of like that we have stoplights, right? And I'm a fan, but like, people don't generally think that when they pay taxes, they're getting stoplights or an ambulance system that allows the stoplights to turn green when an ambulance is coming so that you save 5 minutes on the way to the hospital. All those are government programs. And if we build a sense of understanding and value, then when a person is going to the ballot box and saying, I'm making this decision, it's not just about, like trite, like trendy things. It's about substantive issues about the way that our society is run. So my civics education effort is towards building systems that teach that more effectively.
And I love those cross-curricular examples, right? The home economics piece, right? And you could unpack, right, all of these aspects of conversation,
Absolutely.
right, that impact the things that might happen in that particular classroom, or, the social media connections, or just having students understand, right, that even if they're under 12, right, they can go to a library board meeting, right, and have a conversation about what's important to them. And so, that kind of gets to the next question I wanted to ask you about how educators can make civic learning more relevant and engaging for students. What might that look like, in an environment where someone's, unsure of how this connects to the work that's happening in their classroom?
I think that's the most important part of this discussion, right? If you want to make citizenship relevant, if you want to make government relevant, the best way to teach people to be citizens is to be citizens. So, I always used to tell my kids when I was a civics teacher, like, out of the seats and into the streets, like sitting here lecturing, like, research is so clear on this. Most government education is a teacher in front of class ruminating on government with articles and generally talking more than they listen. But the evidence is clear that if you get a student engaged in a process to influence or participate in government at a young age, they are like 1,000 times more likely to solve their problems through institutional means and procedures, right, through democratic processes. So if you get kids, here's a statistic that haunts me. If you as a teacher take a kid to a government meeting so that they can see the process, you are giving them an experience that less than 5% of kids in civics classes ever go to an actual meeting about the government that we're teaching them about. And that's so attainable. School district is a government entity. Go to the school board meeting, right? And now we have pushback on that because teaching kids to do those things is seen as like activist rather than active. And I think there's a huge line between the word activist and active, right? Participating in existing procedures is active. Activist is like burning it down and fixing it in some people's minds. I don't even agree with that assessment, but that's how it's perceived. So I think if you want kids to find relevance, do things that matter. Another issue is that the perspective of the typical civics textbook is a white suburban perspective or a middle-class suburban perspective, right? Even within cities, the curriculum focuses on middle-class issues within those cities. And if you focus on real life, like the term is lived civics topics, you'll be more successful. Like a group that I worked with I'm so impressed by this. I was working with schools in urban areas, very underfunded, underserved areas in Cleveland. And one school, the kids were talking about the amount of crime and how scary it is to walk past an abandoned building, because there are so many abandoned buildings in this area. So their teacher set out to map the area, identify abandoned buildings, tie that to where crimes had happened, and prove to the city that these buildings were an engine for crime and harm to people. And as a result of that, the city came in and marked and processed and then eliminated these like rundown buildings so that instead you have empty lots that could then be focused on development or sold for housing, but it also reduced crime in the area massively. And that was just a bunch of fifth and sixth graders. Yeah. So that to me is like, look what they did. They saw that if they had a problem and they were able to communicate it, they could fix it and make lives better for people. And like, to me, that's the crux.
Yeah. And just, as you were sharing, Sean, I was thinking back to, and we're talking more than 20 years ago now at
Yeah.
this point, as a high school student, I had to go, like it was a requirement as someone who was getting credit for being in student
Yeah,
government. Like I had to go to a certain number of board meetings, right? A semester. I
absolutely.
wanted to pass, I think it was a pass fail class or something, but if I wanted to pass, I had to go. And so the shifts that have taken place, right, into what it means to be active, what it means to participate, right? That's, before we had an iPhone, right? Or before
Right?
we had an
Yeah.
iPad or a Chromebook to have access to. So, as we think about this new or more modern civic education that we're currently in,
Yeah.
what role does technology play? Are there any specific ed tech tools or platforms you would recommend or maybe stay away from when it comes to, this role of tech?
Yeah. I think, you know, for all the ups, the goods and bads of social media, the thing that social media does is it makes it that a second a kid has a phone and a social media account, they can be an influencer. David Hogg is the deputy director of the Democratic National Committee, and he's 24 years old. And all of that began when he was a high school student,
Mhm.
right? So theoretically, by 21, he was on the scene as a powerful player in deciding the future of our country. Agree or disagree with his politics, that's impressive for a 21. Now, 3 years later, he's running the Democratic Party, right? So that's a prime example to me. And there's other examples out there too, but I think that literacy, it's kind of like this. Like when we talk about literacy, it's like the ability to communicate in the mediums with which that dominate communication, right? So being social media literate is as important to me. But not sticking with that, I think that having people communicate in respectful, in respectful ways when they disagree with people is a lost art. Like all the research shows we're not talking to each other anymore. All the research shows we're cutting off family members and friends if they have differences in politics. Like I know for my friends, we have a system. Like if you talk politics, I pull out a yellow card, like soccer. And if you pull out a red card, and if you do it again, I pull out a red card and you buy a round of drinks, right? Like, or whatever it is. But we have a system because I need to be friends with the people who have different opinions. We can teach those skills by focusing on how we communicate. And one of the things that I really emphasize in my work in civic education, like I'm an educational technology consultant. That is what I do. And I spent a lifetime in the classrooms. And what I learned is that we love to debate. And a debate is like, here's your topic, take a position, lock that position in. And we usually assign the debate before we do the research on the topic. So we're locking into a particular topic. And when you look at the values behind a debate, they are to win, to ignore evidence from the other side and just address your strongest arguments. And it becomes a little bit intense. And my kids are introverted and they never love that. So what I love is if you focus on, there's a place for debates, but instead of making that every discussion, we can focus on dialogues because dialogues include things like looking for places of common understanding and overlap in our desires, listening to others' opinions so that even if we don't agree in them, we are understanding the values that drive their opinion, right? So I like a lot of there's a famous document by a grad student called Kachwaha, and it divides up the values embedded within debates and dialogues. And debates are about winning and silencing the opponent and changing people's minds. A dialogue doesn't focus to change your mind. And I think that parents across the political spectrum value that, right? So any activities that encourage a student to get to develop their voice, to think and to listen, which is the part that's missing, are important. And we're losing that outside of social studies. One of the things that research shows is that outside of social studies, teachers are not talking about these things. They become verboten, for lack of a better word. And so we have to counteract them. So my all-time favorite tool for this is Kialo. It's a free tool to teachers. You can set it up with classes. It allows you to have a conversation where you propose a question and students chime in agreement or disagreement, stating facts. It allows you to post links to their sources, and it allows a response from a student to then if you click on that response to become the central discussion, right? So then everyone can comment on that if they want to. You can do upvoting or commenting. It allows it to be a lot of different things, but it just frames conversations. And when it's over, you can click on, it has a feature that allows you to click and get a visual representation of agreement and disagreement in the conversation, right? Like it's a pie graph. And so you can go back and look at where your own thoughts have been contradictory. And I love that idea. Like helping a person determine a place where their beliefs are contradictory helps them to refine and really understand issues. So those are some of my favorites. But then if I'm going beyond that, then I'm not going to stick with ed tech tools. I'm going to go to programs that you can look at, right? Like any Action Civics program. Although you should be aware that Action Civics programs are oftentimes called engaged citizenship instead of active citizenship in some states, depending on where they're at. But you can go to organizations like Generation Citizen. There's lots of resources that you can find on activities and conversations to structure those kind of discussions. Project Citizen is another one. They have lots of resources, activities that you can do. The MICFA Challenge, their catchphrase is that democracy is a verb, which is literally how I started looking at it. Like do democracy, do citizens, right? And then if you're a science or a math teacher, there's one called Earth Force. And they have a lot of resources for these things that we can engage in to like participate in, like science and data collection, right? I think there's a lot of opportunities for students in high schools to participate in college level research if you engage just by taking readings and temperatures and providing data to larger research on topics, right? So all of those are ways to really engage people and contributing to something that's helping everybody. And I like those.
And I'll make sure to link out to all those for listeners too, so that they can find them and jump in. And, before I ask you about the book, Shawn, I can't help but ask a little bit about the role of AI here. Where does AI fit into conversations educators have around implementing or addressing different issues, just kind of under that big category of, how it impacts civic education?
I feel, wow, that's a charged question. Let me try. That's my thought. One, I think everyone's fear is that AI will allow people to become disengaged with deeper thinking. And I think that as teachers, we have to both teach people about the structural privacy and legal challenges with AI. For instance, just recently, there was a PowerSchool leak that linked more student data into the universe than has ever been leaked before. And that is a breach of trust. So we have to be aware that that can happen and be aware of the information we're putting into AI, right? The new tools of AI are going to like watch your screen and talk to you. If you're a teacher and you use any of those tools with private data, you have broken every single law and level of trust with students. So that's a part for us to watch. But I think AI can be helpful if we see it as a way for us to more quickly understand nuance and generate a deeper understanding of things. But if we let it do its thinking for us, it's the same as citizenship. If you disengage and you cast your single vote, thinking you know what you know because you watch a news channel, then you're not really engaged. I think, so for me, I summarize this with engagement. If we use AI to engage more deeply in understanding, I think we're okay. But if we use AI to like disconnect, disengage, and be shallower in our understanding of things and listen to what we're told, we miss the point, right? And it's the opposite of citizenship, in my opinion. So when schools ask me, I say it's about engagement. How are they engaging with this?
Right. What's the intention, right? Or how are we spending our time in these spaces? And I think that's such a great perspective on just AI in general, but then of course, back to this civic and education connection. So, as we wrap up today, I'm going to make sure to link out to everything we talked about so people can find some great resources, but of course they can learn about your work. So for someone who's on the go, maybe making like a mental bookmark of what to check out later, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work and book?
So I'm the Senior Director of Professional Learning at EdTech Teacher, and we are an organization that's been around for like 20 years, helping schools adapt and use technology ethically, meaningfully, and in innovative new ways. Ironically, Within that, my passion has been civics, and our CEO and I wrote a book called Becoming Active Citizens, Practices to Engage Students in Civic Education Across the Curriculum. I'm really proud of this because I wrote this book thinking, what's our audience really? But we won the Forward Indies Gold Award for Education, which is an award for the best independently published education book in America for 2022. So that was way beyond my expectations for this. And our book has been doing extremely well. And we do a considerable amount of work with schools to build civic competencies with their students. So I'm really, really proud of that. If you want to learn more, you can either email me at Shawn@EdTechTeacher, find me on LinkedIn, where I have moved most of my social media energy. Or you can go to the EdTech Teacher website, and we have all kinds of resources on civic education or AI and any other of the topics that we serve teachers with.
Well, Shawn, thank you so much for your time and your insight and your great ideas and strategies you shared today.
Thank you so much, Monica.
It was lots of fun chatting with Shawn today, and I want to finish up with a few key points to help make this EdTech easy. Schools often need support in revamping and refining programs. Modern civic education emphasizes active participation beyond voting. All subjects can integrate civic engagement through real-world connections. Dialogue skills help kids engage in meaningful, respectful discussions. Remember, you can find the show notes and full list of resources from today's episode, including all of the ways to connect with Shawn, by heading to classtechtips.com/podcast or clicking the show notes button in the summary or the description area in the app that you're listening to this episode. Today's episode is sponsored by my new free quiz, Unlock the Best Way to Use Chatbots in Your Teaching. This quick 5-question quiz will help you figure out the best way to use AI this school year. Find out if AI can support your instructional planning and help you tackle your to-do list. Everyone who takes the quiz will also get a free ebook. Head to classtechtips.com/quiz to find my new quiz. Unlock the best way to use chatbots in your teaching. That's classtechtips.com/quiz. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.